This is the Fluid Jobs podcast, where motorsport professionals share their journeys and offer actionable advice for breaking into and advancing in the competitive world of motorsport. In today's podcast, we dive into the world of McLaren Applied with our guest, Ollie Marler, who made the leap from teaching to motorsport. If you're in a different industry but dream of working in motorsport, this episode is a must listen. Ollie shares how transferable skills can open doors in unexpected places and offers valuable insights into what McLaren Applied looks for in candidates. So let's get into it. Hi, Oliver. And first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here. But first off, can you just give us a brief outline of your role and where you're currently working?
Okay, so my name's Oliver Marler. I work for McLaren Applied. I look after the training and engineering services for motorsport. So I work alongside all of the Formula One teams, Formula E, Indy, NASCAR, and I look after and supporting them in our products and our software.
And what specifically do McLaren Applied do? Because obviously everyone's heard of the road car company, everyone's heard of the race team, sat there and kind of in stealth mode sometimes, I suppose, is McLaren Applied.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look after and we supply products, so both hardware and software, to a series or a range of motorsport series from, as I mentioned, everywhere from F1 all down to kind of E1 and looking at Formula E. And that can be a range of ECUs as well as the software. So our main piece of software is what we know as Atlas. So the squiggly lines that you see the drivers looking at to understand their driving and what the cars are doing. That's Atlas 10 and supplied by us to a range of series. Okay,
so does that mean that kind of McLaren Applied, when you produce something in-house maybe for one of the race teams, after a little while you start selling that on the kind of more open market?
Well, it's we have specific ECUs, say for a Formula One. So our current ECU is a TAG 320B that's used in all the Formula One cars. But other series are able to use that as well. So we see that in some GTP and hypercar classes as well as Formula E. You'll see using the TAG 320B as well.
Okay, great. And then, so back to yourself, really, I suppose, is like, what does your day-to-day involve? What does your role involve? What are the highlights of that?
So one of the great things about my role is that I'm involved with a range of teams. So from, I shouldn't really mention anyone, but from Formula One teams to Formula E to engine suppliers. And really, I understand their needs and requirements and their gaps in knowledge maybe for our software and hardware. And then I put courses together and either deliver them myself into the team or I will get one of my engineers across to support me in that training and deliver. You know, my main goal is to really be able to put a team on the front of the grid by using our software and hardware and get the full potential out of that for them to use on the grid.
Fantastic. So you're actually kind of inventing the documentation and then you're delivering it as well. Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah, and that's it. So I'll speak to the team, understand what the gaps of that knowledge is, and then develop from the ground up using kind of the experts that I have within in-house to kind of develop this material and then take it into the team and deliver it.
Wow, they're big. It seems like kind of a big challenge to understand each of the products because they're not simple products, right? And then to actually put together the training material.
Yeah, it's been a baptism of fire coming in and learning this software from scratch. But I mean, I've been involved in motorsport for many years. I have a passion for it. When you have that passion for what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, then it makes life a lot easier. You know, I've got a passion for education and I've got a passion for motorsport. I combine them together on a day-to-day basis, and then I can help the teams. And if it's something I can do a very small amount, then I'm happy with that, and I feel I've been involved in that team.
Fantastic. Well, look, I understand the crossover of motorsport and trying to teach people about stuff. So that's what we try and do. So yeah, I can appreciate that a lot. So I guess let's rewind back to the very, very beginning. You mentioned there that you've got a passion for motorsport. Our candidates that we speak to, most of them do have a passion for motorsport as well. But where did yours actually begin? Can you remember that first moment when you thought, that's for me?
See, if I go back, I grew up at racetracks. I grew up with my grandfather and uncle. My family were heavily involved in historic racing, classic clubmans, everything from racing a Lotus Elan to McLaren M80s and Chevron B19s. So I've always grown up around racetracks. I would have loved to have been a driver, but being 6'1" and over 100 kilos doesn't really lend itself to being in a lightweight Formula car. I tend not to fit in them particularly well. So I kind of put that on the back burner. But, myself, I race on sim racing. So I'm involved in several teams that I race, as well as that having the coaching and the driving that I do within that kind of has always been ticking around in the background. And I find that really important because it can bring those experiences into what I do on a day-to-day basis.
So, that makes perfect sense, and similarities to myself as well. I grew up at the racetracks watching my dad race. But during your education, did that continue? Were you aiming for a job in motorsport right at the beginning, or did you kind of find your way there over time?
I found my way over there. So I started off life as a teacher. I taught for about 5 or 6 years, and it got to the point where I was itching, didn't really know where I was going, didn't really want to be there anymore. And I went to, of all things, I went to the pub one night with a mate of mine, Pete, and said to him, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I love teaching, but I don't love being in a school. And he said, what about doing product training? And I kind of stared at him and was like, what on earth are you on about, Pete? I was like, you never heard of this before? And he said, well, he worked for Audi at the time. And he said, well, we have people come in and teach us about product, about the cars, and teach us all about the features, the advantages, benefits of the different cars. And I kind of went, okay, well, let's try that. Actually went home that night and applied for a job with Mercedes-Benz UK, got the job, and suddenly I found myself in the automotive industry. And it kind of that career developed over 7-8 years of different manufacturers and working my way through. And eventually I had a phone call from McLaren Applied and asking me to come and kind of interview for this role that, I never really even knew existed before. I never dreamed of that I could be involved in motorsport in that way and be able to deliver my expert from what I've learned in education and teaching in the motors industry into the motorsport arena. And suddenly I found myself sitting there working on my next stage of my career.
So I just want to rewind a little bit, actually, Ollie, if that's okay, because I think a lot of people, it's that first. We have listeners who are, it might be their first job that they're looking for, but we also have people coming from different industries as well, and they're trying to understand how to kind of break down that door to get into motorsport. At what point, when you had that conversation with, I think it was Pete that you mentioned, how old were you at that point? How long had you already been working for?
I think I was about 27 at the time, 26, 27. I can't have been much older than that. And it was a very frank and open conversation, one of those over a pint kind of going, what do I do next with my life? I'd hit that kind of, that kind of crossroads of where to go next. And I just remember him talking about motorsport, we had a chat, I'd love to be in motorsport. How do I do it? And he said, you love cars. Why didn't you get into automotive as a way in to start that career? And I think the biggest thing that held me back from ever making that jump into motorsport is I originally thought it was a car and a driver and maybe a mechanic. That's all I ever saw of motorsport, doing what I did. It was only now when I sit in motorsport arena and I go to the teams and I speak to the people involved at McLaren Applied, and you realise actually how much bigger the motorsport arena is. If you're a lawyer or a solicitor, you can be in motorsport. If you're a chef, you can get into motorsport and access into a team in that way. So it's so diverse. And when you especially go into the Formula One teams and you see the amount of people that are involved and all have their little kind of bit of effort in getting the car around the track and onto the podium and to win the championship, and you forget on how many careers there are involved in getting that driver onto the grid and that car to win. And that's my kind of, don't hold yourself back and going, well, I'm only this, what could I do? There is so many careers in motorsport. The biggest thing I didn't do at that time was open my eyes to the types of career. At no point did I ever think that McLaren Applied would need somebody to teach their products. Sure. And talk about it and go into the teams. I never knew that existed. And I kick myself now, years later, in understanding that was a possibility.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do with this podcast in particular, is open people up to understanding what roles are available within motorsport and wider engineering as well. And so I guess key learning there is have a look around to see what types of jobs are available. If you're sitting on the just outside the fence thinking that you would love to get a job in motorsport, maybe you're a lot closer than you think. Interesting, Ollie, that you didn't directly go for a job in motorsport. Was that because you didn't know that existed in motorsport, those types of jobs? Or was it because you thought, I'll try and get my foot in the door at kind of something that's probably be a bit easier to get a role in and then go from there?
If I knew that role had existed years ago, I would have put my hands up and been jumping up and down and saying, look at me. Because I never knew that, and I had such a narrow view of what the motorsport industry was, that I never knew existed. I couldn't ever imagine that was a role or something that was available to me. And that's my own fault. And that's why partly I want to have, I was so interested in talking to yourself, is thinking the bigger picture to get your name out there, speak to teams. If you're interested in, even as an engineering role, go to races. We're lucky with a lot of the lower series that they have open paddocks, and you can walk around and you can meet teams and get your name out there and put a name to a face. A name to a face is so important, because then you start the communication and getting your feet in that way, volunteering. And it's lovely to see the amount of people that are putting their hands up out there to say, I'm here, I'm available, come and get me.
Yeah, exactly. Two key things that I've learned while doing these podcasts is, the first one is people love, when they're hiring, they love these extracurricular activities, going to work with a race team, doing Formula Student, whatever it might be. And then the second thing that I've been learning is that, we spoke to MSV yesterday, who own, Donington, Brands Hatch, Cadwell, all of the circuits, as you well know, Ollie. He was saying, we want people to come down during the week, the test days and the track days. You can just walk in and go and talk to a team. So it's like, there's not really any excuses there for not being able to go and get in front of at least a few teams. And I think one of the key things there is just taking it into your own hands and making it happen.
Absolutely. I kind of use an example. Nydia, a friend of mine, she gets out there and volunteers. She is now kind of getting to that point where she's being paid to look after teams as an engineer. And I love her for that, because she's so proactive in putting her hands up and speaking to teams, in saying, look, I'm here, I want to work, and now she's starting to get paid. It's paying off, and she's now going to university next year, and because of this constant involvement and constant working to get where she wants to be. And with that sort of attitude as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, she's going to get there, because she is so proactive. There's no sitting back and going, I'm just going to sit here, why can't people hire me? She's on the ball all the time. And that's really quite a key point, is wanting it that much and getting out there and getting your names. Now, there are the ways of doing it with the qualifications, and there's plenty of courses out there to get your names. But as soon as you start putting a face to that name and going, I remember her, yeah, or I remember him, let's get them on board. And that's really a kind of key thing, especially when I go into universities and people are introducing themselves. Oh, this is what I do. This is my passion. This is what I do. I remember those people, and eventually I want to expand our training department to come to the point where I can look at more people to come into the teams and train. Those are the people that I'm going to remember because they're proactive in introducing themselves and getting out there and messaging me. And it's lovely to see that. And that's one thing I'd always recommend is get yourself out there, get yourself known, get the background of what you need and the experience. Because if you've got the experience, then people are going to kind of stand up and listen.
Yeah, exactly. There's 3 key things, I think, to getting out there and doing it. You get experience, for one.
Yeah.
You build a network because you're talking to people at the track and meeting new people. And you've got something that stands out incredibly well on your CV that says a lot about your mentality and your perspective on things. And I think, that's what employers are looking for, especially when we employ as well. They're the things that, that puts people head and shoulders above other candidates that don't have that experience, because it says a lot more than just experience, right? Oh, sorry, Ali, go on. You go.
No, I was just going to say, we're talking about experience here, but sometimes it's also, for our production, when we're producing our sensors, we're not always just looking for kind of experience. It's also about that mental capability of, what can I do to make this person into an incredible person? We don't employ for experience when we're looking at production for our sensors. What we're doing is looking at that person's outlook. Have they got do they like detailed? Are they looking at that kind of small details and finishing a project from beginning to end? But also, it's not also about motorsport. Have they got a passion for electronics, for example? Again, we see this different kind of capability of coming together to really ensure that they're getting the most out of their job and having that job satisfaction. And when we see that, they're the people that we want on board to move further.
Yeah. Okay. So just to rewind back to your journey into motorsport, when you went from teaching to Mercedes, and then when you went from Mercedes to McLaren, right?
So I had a few other products. So I worked for Volkswagen for a bit and looked after their people development. Okay. And I also I worked for another company that supplied training as a supplier to different manufacturers as well.
Right. Okay. So, but when you transitioned from teaching to automotive and then automotive to motorsport, which is still a step, right? It's still a kind of a change. Was there any, first of all, resistance from yourself? Like, how did that feel to be stepping into the unknown or somewhat unknown? And then was there any resistance from Merck or McLaren because you hadn't had that kind of experience within that industry?
I think the big thing is for Mercedes, we're looking at the time for a product trainer. So they were like, this is brilliant. Normally we get an expert in product, but they don't know how to deliver. Yeah. I knew how to deliver. I was standing in front of 500 people, 300 people, 200, 100, whatever it was. I wasn't fussed about standing up and delivering. But I had the passion about automotive. I had the passion about cars, where they went, if you've got a passion, you're going to willing to learn about it. And they gave me a task. I remember having the interview and talking about the C-Class when it first came out, the W204 chassis. The fact I still remember it's a W204 chassis after all these years is quite scary or telling. But it was that ability to kind of learn on the job because I had that passion. And the similar thing to when I went to McLaren Applied, yes, it was stepping into an unknown, but stepping into a place that felt like home, which is a bit weird to say. But I had a passion for motorsport. I'd already started to use a previous version of Atlas with the sim racing and getting it working with iRacing. So I'd already had that knowledge and I could demonstrate that knowledge. And then that's quite, so I end up using my software in my spare time and at work. So
that's a big indicator, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit telling. but it's also brought McLaren Applied a different dimension from a sim racer. They've never looked at sim racing. Suddenly you've got this nutter jumping up and down and saying, well, sim racing should be serious. It still is a big industry that shouldn't be knocked and shouldn't be overlooked. And hopefully in the future, you never know what will happen. But if it's got anything to do with me, I think you could work it out. And having that passion for motorsport, and then the knowledge of how to pass the material on and be able to develop that further, that kind of lent itself to them to say, okay, he's a serious candidate, because there's that passion, but the core skills we're looking for, he already has. He's not scared or worried about doing that. And it was a dream job for me, because they never had a academy. They've never had anything that was concrete before. So I went in and formed this department and formed this academy to how I saw it fitting in with the motorsport world, and how I could work with the teams to develop them further.
Yeah, fascinating story. So as we're speaking to more and more people, we spoke to Kimi Räikkönen's race engineer, or ex-race engineer, yesterday. And he had the same thing. He was prepared. He was passionate about the thing, and he just drove himself forward and upward. And it's making yourself lucky, right? It's a very similar story. It's incredible just to see how people are prepared, have the passion there. You're using Atlas in the sim. I mean, that speaks volumes about you and your passion, and it's perfect for McLaren. So I can very much see why you got that role.
Yeah, the sim racing is a big passion in it. It's the closest thing I can get into a racing car. I can, I build my rig around me, and I can fit in it. Also, I've got, a family. I've got my boy. I can't risk that side of it anymore, plus the financial side of it, as we know. But it allows me to still have that passion for racing, me to understand what I call using Atlas in anger, because I'm not going to get that kind of access on a racetrack. It allows me to then do my coaching. I'm still teaching. I'm using it on a day-to-day basis to get some sort of understanding what the systems and performance engineers will be using on trackside, that I can then pull in and see and learn from them, and also see how that's working on a day-to-day basis.
And when you went for these kind of slight changes of career at Mercedes and then McLaren, did they take a look at your previous education? I don't know if you had a degree or not, but did they even care about that? Because we have a lot of questions about that as well.
I think the only thing they cared about, I had a degree in education as I needed it to move on. So I think they cared that they gave me the credibility that I could stand up and develop and teach and stand up in front of the group. But then it was the experience that I had over the years in automotive and training and developing and setting up e-learning and creating videos, and my work that I taught person in my previous job, Robin, taught me how to use Adobe. So I started creating videos for McLaren Applied on, help putting things together like that massively helped. So it was that kind of what I'd learned previously outside of my degree also lent it a big thing. I had a piece of paper to say I was, I could teach from the university, but it was all what I'd learned previously. And I remember in the interview, they asked me how would I have changed the instructions for Atlas 9 for the sim racing, because that was available is available on iRacing. And I remember going, well, I would have made a little video. And I remember going away on Saturday after the interview on a Friday and going, well, I've got Adobe, I've got Atlas 9, I've got sim racing. It's going to take me half an hour to put a little video, 2-minute video together about track creation on Atlas 9. So I put it together, emailed it to them, and on the Monday they received it and were like, well, hang on. So this guy's taken the interview, did the extra bit of work and sent it in. And thankfully, that kind of was the finishing touch for me to be able to get that job. Yeah.
Yeah. So the details to the little things that you just need to sit there and have a think about how you can stand out and add value make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we were saying at the beginning with getting to the tracks, walking around test days, track days, that you can go and meet these teams and say, hi, can I shadow you for a weekend? Can I get this experience? And, I'm not saying that you'll get 100% success rate on a race weekend. It's not always it's quite pressured. And a lot of people are running around. So, you need to pick your time properly. But it's about getting yourself out there, about getting yourself known, understanding it, there's free versions of, Atlas 9. If you search Atlas 9 iRacing, you can get data. You can start to understand how Atlas works. There are, not that I should say it, but there are other ways you can get free samples of software to understand what they're being done, to teach yourself, to understand. There's forums out there, there's Facebook groups about data analysts. It's about kind of creating your knowledge and taking control of it. There's a lot of people that sit back and go, I've got a degree, why can't I get a job? Because there's people out there like Nydia who are constantly on it to try and better themselves, educate themselves. And, it's lovely to see that, she's jetting off to Indonesia to work out there, and then was Formula 3 or Formula 4 for India in India. Because she's putting herself out there and doing it. And that's what I'd like to see people do, because it makes a massive difference.
It does. I really think, like, from my perspective, we're a small company, right? But from my perspective, that extracurricular stuff, going out there, getting involved, is much more important than actually a degree, because I want to see the mentality. Now, that being said, I'm sure that is different depending on the role, of course, and depending on the company. But for me, I want to see that they're passionate about motorsport. They're willing to get their hands dirty, and it makes the biggest difference.
And you can get, there is the traditional way of going to, get a degree in Cranfield, and you end up with a master's, and you go in that way. But that's not the end of it. There are so many other ways and less traditional ways to go about getting involved in motorsport. And there are some roles, so McLaren Applied, that you don't need all of those qualifications to get into that role. But it means that you're involved in motorsport, and we see then people going from production to engineering and to development, and using their skills to help the engineers and developers to make the sensors better than they could have done, because they understand how they're being put together and how they're being built. So it's not just the traditional ways that we're used to get into motorsport. There's so many other different ways.
Yeah, of course. And I also think the advice is, if you do have a degree or you're getting your degree, you still need to go out and do those things.
Please don't everyone drop out. That's my name being down there.
Yeah, definitely don't drop out. But I might have dropped out. But what I'm saying is, you get your engineering degree, and then you're in a competitive space, and you still need to go out and have that kind of real world experience and volunteer. Absolutely. And get involved to stand out in your circle as well.
Yeah, it's lovely to see when people get involved like that and put themselves out there. And the people I've met through different series and different universities, you really are seeing a new generation of people going to be involved in motorsport, and you think, wow, where are these people? Motorsport series with these people coming out of universities in that way, it's going to be quite incredible. Then you see the people coming in from a more untraditional way, or an untraditional way. Again, you kind of go, the next 10 years in motorsport is going to be very, very exciting when these people are fully involved and fledged within a team.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned putting a team together at McLaren Applied. I guess my next kind of round of questions is about what kind of advice, or no, rather, what you're looking for at first, the application stage, and then going into interviews. What are you looking for in those situations?
So let's take production as an example. So we're looking at a scheme within McLaren Applied to take somebody with no experience in production with electronic components, within 18 months, having them fully fledged and being able to work independently and create sensors that could be the next week on an F1 car. I'm not looking at that point for somebody who is able to do all of their ISO all their IPC qualifications and be able to solder 100%. What I'm looking for is somebody who's got attention to detail, somebody who is willing to follow a task from the beginning to the end, somebody who likes building something, somebody who's got a passion, well, maybe for motorsport or for electronics. That's the kind of the core details. If you like Lego, somebody put it to me, if you like Lego, you're in an ideal job for building production. And as soon as he saw, I was like, I'm going to use that. That's mine.
That's a good one.
But it's true. They like that building. If you like that building blocks, then it works incredibly well. And it's that sort of outlook and that attention to detail that we try and look for and we hire for, because that brings a new breed and a new passion into our production facility at the MTC.
Right, so kind of like the fundamental traits of somebody. They don't necessarily need all the details, but they need to...
It's the traits, it's that underlying traits that I'm looking for, not the necessarily looking for, they can solder, that they can use a stripper, they can use, I don't know, like a laser etching tool. I'm not looking for those. It's the core abilities underneath that make a good person for production.
So at McLaren Applied, how does the process work? Is it application and then interview?
Yeah, so it would be an application and submitting of kind of a CV on the McLaren Applied website. There would be the careers part, and then we would shortlist and go to interviews from there.
Okay, yeah. And are there any practical tasks involved in that?
Not that I know of at the moment. I don't think we would do that. It's about their kind of core abilities. But as we're looking at production, we're starting to identify the core necessities for the job, the kind of the underlying features of somebody. We may change that. It all depends on what we see and want to move forward.
Okay, great. And so on the other side of that, I suppose, when you're kind of at the interviewing stage, are there any big things that actually candidates should be careful around? Any mistakes that they can potentially make? I don't want to take the negative perspective on this, but also, it's important to tell people kind of how to be professional in those interviews and how not to stand out in the wrong ways. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go back to my teacher days, actually, when we used to have the year 11s and 12s, 13s, and we were starting to talk about kind of interview, is do your research on the company. McLaren, like for example, a lot of people still think that McLaren Group and McLaren Applied and McLaren Racing are all underneath the same umbrella. Actually, McLaren Applied separated 2019 to form their own or become their own company and being brought out by Grable. So that's a key point, that if you could bring that up in an interview, suddenly it shows that you've done your research about McLaren Applied and where they sit. And we share a name, but we're actually two very different companies. So doing your research, understanding what the role is about, and understanding a company's history is a really good way of standing out to the rest of the applications, I think. Because it just shows that you've gone to a level of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually. And to be honest with you, I wasn't fully aware of that situation either. So, do your research, understand how the company is sitting, how the structure of the company is as well, I think is quite important.
Yeah, it just shows a kind of a good level of understanding and that you've done your research and that you're passionate about the brand.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Finally, I suppose looking back over your career, Ollie, what's been the biggest lesson for you, the biggest piece of advice that you could give the candidates listening to this?
I think the biggest mistake I ever made and the biggest kind of lesson is I was so narrow viewed on what my career could be. I did did my degree in education. I thought, I've done my degree in education. I'm now going to be a teacher for the rest of my life. And that was such a narrow view. I never understood where that career could take me and how that career could look. you know, and I'm proud now of that I've got out of teaching, and I'm proud that I've now taken this different career through automotive and into motorsport, and I love where I am. And I now know that actually I could go around to different careers within motorsport as I learn more and I understand more. And that's one thing that I kind of always say to other teachers, and I get a lot of teachers saying, oh, how did you get out? I don't know what I could do. Is you've got a core competency there of teaching, and don't be so narrow viewed about that. And that could be any career as well, you know, and I say it to a lot of people, if you want to get to X, don't kind of look at where you are at A and go, I can only go in this direction. And that was the biggest fault that I ever made back when I was a teacher. And it was only because of Pete that I got the direction and the way of us. And I'm not one for going to have a pint at a pub on a Friday night, but I'm so glad I did that that day.
That's when you knew you needed to change roles.
Yeah, exactly. I still wind him up today, and still, you know, if I've had a bad day, I still wind him up and say it's his fault. But you know, because of him, I wouldn't be sitting here now. I wouldn't be working with McLaren.
But then, so I've struggled with this in the past as well, to be honest, because you only know what you know, right? Well, you only know the options that are in front of you. So if you were back then, now, what would you do differently in case you've got candidates that are sat there listening to this, and they're in this position? How would you approach things differently now?
I think the idea is, I would have never even have searched. You know, I'm just talking about myself here, but unless I knew it, I would have just been looking at the Times Educational Standard, which is where all the teaching jobs are ever applied. I would have never have thought of going, well, actually, let's go to McLaren Applied, let's go to McLaren, let's go to any of the Formula One teams, because actually there's trainers that are needed for that, but more management training. But then means I could have got into working for those brands and working that way forward. So the biggest thing, I think, is just opening your eyes to other brands. What we say at the beginning, if you're a lawyer, if you're a chef and you want to get into Formula One, then they have the most amazing catering departments in there. You know, you want to work, I think you've been to the Porsche Centre at Silverstone. You know, they've got an amazing catering department, amazing food there. But a chef may not think of ever being involved in that and around the motorsport and vehicles and cars and automotive going in that direction. So it's really about opening your eyes and I hate to say it, but thinking outside the box on where it could go.
Yeah. Going back to the catering just for a moment, the F1 teams and the big race teams all have a traveling catering team, right? And so if you're a chef, that's a fantastic role, and they do have excellent food. I think what you've just mentioned there, Ollie, I think for me, the way to kind of get to where you are now sooner would be to actually think about your passion and the skills that you have and where they can cross over, and then go and look in that direction. Because without Pete, right, if you'd have looked at jobs around motorsport or the automotive industry, you would have actually found some educational positions there, right? And then you could have got there a little bit earlier. So I think the advice, at least, I don't know what you're going to say about this from my side, is actually look at where that Venn diagram of your skills and your passion cross over, and go and Google it and have a look around. Things are a bit easier now with the internet, of course. Go and have a look around, and you might be surprised by what roles actually exist. Yeah,
and I think that's a brilliant way of putting it. And I think there's not many other ways you could put that, because the teams are constantly hiring, and we're not just talking F1. There's a whole plethora of series that we shouldn't forget across the world, and some that we don't really understand or know about and hear about because they don't get the visibility that they deserve. But it's, again, I would just say, do your research and find out where your passion and your core skills cross over, and then that, with getting yourself out there and getting yourself known, I think is the way to do it.
Fantastic, Oliver. Thank you so much for that. If people want to find out more about you or McLaren Applied, where should they go?
You can find, or let's have a look, this LinkedIn, of course, of Oliver Marler. Feel free to have a look on there. Instagram, I've got my sim racing one, which is Spartan Sim Racing. Have a look on there, and I always try and help as many people as I can. People help me in my career. I like to pass that on as long as they help other people moving forward as well. So I try and pass it on a bit.
Fantastic. Oliver, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks very much, Scott.